Karen, the most insufferable HOA president in town, showed up at my farm demanding that I leave immediately. According to her, the property now belonged to the community, and I had no right to be there. Have you ever had that moment in life when you wonder if you're really awake, or if you've accidentally wandered into an episode of an absurd sitcom? Because that's exactly how I felt when I saw a woman standing in the middle of my farm, arms crossed, looking at me as if I were a trespasser. The problem? That piece of land, every centimeter of soil, every tree, every chicken scratching in the yard, everything there was mine. Paid for with my sweat, registered in my name, declared in taxes, and duly protected against any attempt at theft. But here comes this woman, with that smug smile of someone who is used to winning by shouting, determined to turn my patience into a test of endurance. "This property is now part of the community," she declared, with the confidence of someone who has read half an article on the internet and decided that she is an expert in property law. I blinked, absorbing the scene. Maybe it was a collective delirium. Maybe it was a prank. Or, who knows, some reality show where they test the limits of human sanity. But no, it was real. She continued, "The Residents Association decided that this land should be shared. You can't just take over such a large space for yourself while there are people who could enjoy it." Yes, you read that right. According to this woman's revolutionary logic, I couldn't own my own farm. I had to share it, as if this were a party hall or a city park. And the best part? She talked as if I had stolen someone's land. As if, in the middle of the night, I had climbed fences and carried an entire farm under my arm. I swear I tried to answer calmly. Not least because I've learned that arguing with these types of people is like trying to teach algebra to a brick. But before I could open my mouth, she pulled out a cell phone and started taking pictures. "This is evidence," she announced, as if she were a detective in an organized crime case. Evidence of what, exactly? Me standing on my farm? The poor thing's patience was wearing thin, but I refused to give her the show she wanted. Only then came the next level of insanity. Reinforcements. Yes, because apparently this woman didn't come alone. She had a small army of equally annoying neighbors who approached us as if we were in the middle of a historic battle, each with their own nonsensical argument, all determined to turn my property into a common-use space. And that's when I realized the game. It wasn't just about the land, it was about control, about a woman who, for some reason, thought she could simply decide who can and can't live there. "We are already organizing a petition to request legal ownership of this area," announced one of her followers, a man in khaki shorts and sandals who exuded the energy of someone who spends his days fighting with supermarket cashiers over expired coupons. The word petition made me laugh, because, oh, if it were that easy, I'd have signed one asking nosy neighbors to disappear from my life. But, of course, it didn't stop there. This woman, this destructive force of nature, had a bigger plan, and from the gleam in her eyes, I knew the worst was yet to come. If someone had told me that one day I would wake up to find a group of lunatics planning to steal my property using nothing but sheer bureaucratic delusions, I would have laughed in their face. But there I was, planted in the middle of my own farm, surrounded by a bunch of strangers discussing how to turn my house into a public asset. What intrigued me most wasn't even the fact that this woman, let's call her the visionary of improvised communism, was talking as if she had any real power over the situation. What got me was her confidence, as if she'd done this kind of thing before, as if she'd pushed other people out of their homes using nothing but an authoritarian tone of voice and a group of equally insufferable neighbors. And what worried me most was that these people were going along with the absurd idea. Because, you see, it wasn't just her. There were several of them. They looked like they'd just come out of a condominium meeting where someone threw collective delirium gas in the air, and everyone decided that they now owned other people's land. A guy in a cap, sunglasses, and that I'm a volunteer for an NGO that nobody asked for. Smile approached me with a clipboard. If you want to avoid problems, you can simply sign this paperwork and facilitate the transition. Transition, he said, transition. As if they were kindly taking control of a bankrupt company and not trying to forcibly take over a property that, guess what, already had an owner. It's going to happen anyway, he added. If not peacefully, then through a more formal process. Of course, the good old, if you don't do it the easy way, will complicate it. All he had to do was start talking about consequences and necessary measures. That's when the woman, the mastermind behind all this tomfoolery, crossed her arms and smiled. The smile of someone who has rehearsed in front of the mirror the right way to look like an authority without actually being one. We've already contacted the town hall, she announced, and we're collecting signatures. We have enough support to push this through. I didn't know whether to laugh or wonder what planet these people lived on. Signatures? Support? I repeated, trying to understand how far this play went. And the part where I'm the only legal owner of this land? Where does that come into your magic equation? She tilted her head, as if explaining to a stubborn child why having ice cream for breakfast isn't allowed. People are tired of seeing large properties being monopolized by individuals while the community needs more space. You know, there's a funny thing about people like that. They never own anything. They've never built anything. They've never bought anything with their own money. But somehow, they think they can decide what to do with what belongs to others. That's not monopolization, I retorted, laughing without believing I needed to state the obvious. It's called private property. But she was already completely ignoring what I was saying. Because these types of people don't discuss. They don't listen. They just impose. That's when I understood. Their plan wasn't to convince me. It never was. Their plan was to wear me down. It was to make my life a living hell until I got tired of it and left. Ah, but I like a good challenge. The next day, I woke up to a strange buzzing sound, a different kind of movement. I looked out of the window and saw something that made me almost spit out my coffee. Signs. Signs being installed around my property. They were community signs, with messages like green area, community space, and even one that said future community park. I didn't even know where to start. Firstly, who financed those signs? Secondly, how could they even dare stick them on my land? I left the house with the calm of someone who already knew they were going to have a bad day and found a group of people holding papers and handing out leaflets about the new community project. The woman was in the middle, of course, smiling as if she had already won. We're just spreading the word, she said, with the honeyed tone of someone who thinks she's being benevolent. It's nothing official yet, but we want the population to feel part of the space. Part of the space? Wait a minute. So now anyone can arrive at other people's homes and feel part of it? I took a deep breath. Look, I don't know what kind of collective delirium has taken hold of you, but this is my land. She just smiled. For now. Ah, that's a good one. Ah, so you mean that if I stick a sign on your house saying that it's now mine, that's it? It's not the same, she retorted, changing her tone as if she wasn't expecting a logical answer. This is for the good of the community. Of course it is. The good of the community. Always that wonderful justification for trying to appropriate what isn't theirs. But I already knew that there was no point in arguing. So I did what anyone who values their sanity does. I called a lawyer. And that's when things really started to flare up. Because, friends, people like that only respect two things: lawsuits and a good public humiliation. And I was more than ready for both. You know that moment when you realize you're dealing with a level of insanity that borders on science fiction? Well, that's exactly how I felt when I woke up the next morning and discovered that things had taken a turn for the worse. The night before, I had already decided that I was going to take this to court. I wasn't going to give this woman and her followers any space to continue spreading the collective delusion that my farm was some kind of public park just because they decided so. But I wasn't prepared for what I saw when I left the house. The first thing I noticed was the gate, or rather, the absence of one. My gate, which until yesterday had stood firm and strong, had been removed, torn down, as if it were a mere obstacle in the way of a great architectural project. And it didn't stop there. My fences were also compromised. Some had been cut, others simply knocked down, as if they had been pushed over by an invisible tractor. In their place, improvised dirt paths, as if someone was planning to draw routes through my land to the great imaginary community park. And the icing on the cake? A group of children playing on my lawn, with their parents watching from afar, smiling and waving as if everything was perfectly normal. That's when I realized they were trying to kick me out. There was no longer any doubt. This wasn't just the whim of a bored woman with too much time on her hands. It was a coordinated action to make me give up my property. They knew that if they pushed me hard enough, if they destroyed everything bit by bit, if they turned my land into a space where I could no longer live in peace, I might throw in the towel. Well, too bad for them, because I'm stubborn. Without wasting any time, I called the police. When I explained the situation, the initial reaction was skepticism. After all, who in their right mind would try to steal an entire farm like that? But it only took me mentioning the destruction of the fences, the removal of the gate, and the installation of the signs without my permission for the person on the other end of the line to finally realize that I wasn't exaggerating. While I was waiting, I made a point of documenting everything: photos, videos, statements from a few neighbors who still had an ounce of common sense and knew that this was ridiculous. I was going to make sure I had enough evidence to sue this woman until she had to mortgage her house to pay for lawyers. When the police finally arrived, it was like watching a documentary about the local fauna in a state of confusion. The children were quickly called back by their parents, who tried to act as if they didn't know they were trespassing. One of them even had the audacity to say, "Oh, we thought the farm was already open to the public." What do you mean it was already open to the public? What kind of insane logic makes someone think that a private farm, fenced off and with a gate, until yesterday, has suddenly become a community playground? But the best part was when the woman appeared. She appeared in the middle of the crowd as if she were the heroine of the day. She approached the police officers with that rehearsed smile of someone trying to be a model citizen and was already rehearsing her speech before anyone even asked. "Ah, officers! I'm glad you're here. I want to report this man for antisocial behavior and for trying to impede the progress of the community." I swear, for a moment I thought one of the officers was going to laugh in her face. "Ma'am, we're here because we've received reports of trespassing and vandalism," one of the officers said. "You informed us that the gate had been removed and the fences destroyed. What do you know about that?" And that's when the real show of Oscar-worthy acting began. "Oh, but that's a misunderstanding." She gesticulated like a housewife in a cheap commercial. "The gate was abandoned. We thought no one lived here anymore." Abandoned? Yes, because everyone knows that abandoned lots usually have owners who live on them, pay taxes, keep everything clean, and call the police when trespassers show up. The policeman didn't seem convinced, and I took the opportunity to show him the photos, the videos, all the evidence that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an open attempt at theft. That's when the woman lost her temper. "This is absurd," she shouted, pointing her finger in my face. "You can't just keep so much space to yourself. That's not fair." That's it. Finally, the mask fell off. "Ma'am," the policeman intervened, already writing on his notepad, "are you admitting that you encouraged other people to enter this property without permission?" She froze for a moment. I'm just saying that this needs to be a more open place." "Right. Do you have any documents proving that this land belongs to the community?" Silence. She tried to say something, but realized that the only thing she could do at that moment was to shut up. "Very well," the policeman continued. "As there are no records to prove what you are claiming, and there is concrete evidence of vandalism and trespassing, We will need you to accompany us for clarification." The audience watched in shock. I just crossed my arms and watched, satisfied, as the woman finally began to realize that she was in trouble. "This is an abuse of power," she exclaimed, starting the theater. "You'll regret treating a respectable citizen like this." As the police escorted her to the car, the neighbors next to her began to disperse. Some pretended they had never been there, while others mumbled some lame excuse. But best of all, the signs began to be removed. The flyers disappeared, and a sense of relief began to wash over me. But I knew it wouldn't end there, because these types of people never learn their lesson straight away. They always have one last shot, one last attempt at revenge. And from the way the woman looked at me before getting into the police car, I knew she still had something planned. Her problem? I was very ready for that. I wanted to say that this was the end of the story, that the woman had learned her lesson, that common sense had prevailed, and that peace reigned once again on my farm. But of course, that didn't happen, because certain people don't know when to give up. They can't accept that they've lost, and instead of simply backing down and getting on with life, they prefer to double down on stupidity. I knew the woman wasn't going to give up that easily. She was the kind of person who, even after being caught red-handed, still thinks she can get away with it. And it didn't take long for me to find out what her big trick was. The day after the confusion with the police, I started receiving letters. Yes, letters. Handwritten, printed, some even typed and signed by different residents. They were complaints, protests, emotional pleas about how selfish I was being by not sharing my property with the community. One of them said, "You have so much space. It's not fair to keep it to yourself while other people could be enjoying it." Another was even more dramatic. "Think of the children. They need a safe place to play, and you're denying them that out of sheer greed." Yes, now I was a cartoon villain who hated children. Soon they'd say, I kicked puppies for fun. But the best part was the letter that came with a formal petition. Yes, the woman got dozens of neighbors to sign a document demanding that my farm be turned into a public space. And the most ridiculous thing, they actually sent this request to the town hall. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. Did these people really think they could take over my land based on how many signatures they could collect, as if it were a popularity contest? But the final blow came a few days later, when I received an official notification from the town hall itself. Apparently, the woman had some contacts inside and had managed to get a review done on the use of the land. The notification said that they were analyzing the possibility of publicly requisitioning my farm. In other words, they were considering the option of taking my property under the justification of community use. That's when I realized that this nonsense had left the realm of stupidity and entered the realm of real danger, because if the city council decided to go ahead with it, I could end up in a long and expensive legal battle to prove that I had the right to keep my own property. But luckily, I already had a plan. First, I contacted a lawyer who specializes in land disputes. He laughed when he heard the story. He laughed out loud. He asked if this was a prank. When I said no, he just replied, "Oh, that'll be fun." Secondly, I started to fight back. I gathered all the evidence I had, the videos, the photos, the flyers they had spread, the testimonies of sensible neighbors who were just as disgusted as I was. I took it all directly to the town hall, along with a formal complaint against the woman and any official who was involved in this ridiculous attempt at fraud. But I didn't stop there. Remember the other neighbors who signed that stupid petition? Well, I started suing each of them individually for trespass and property damage. And do you know what their reaction was? Panic. Because, you see, it's very easy to sign an idiotic piece of paper when someone shows up at your door with a nice speech about community rights. But when the bill arrives and you realize that you might have to pay a lawyer to defend yourself, things change. In less than a week, half of those who signed the petition came to me to apologize and beg me to withdraw the lawsuits. They said they hadn't understood correctly, that they had been fooled, that they thought it was just a silly idea that would never come to anything. And, in a way, I actually believed them, because most of these people didn't think for themselves. They were just puppets being manipulated by the woman who was now missing. That's right, gone. After the police took her in for clarification, she dropped off the radar. She didn't show up at community events anymore. She didn't walk past my farm with that superior look on her face. She didn't organize campaigns to rescue my property anymore. And then came the best news of all. The investigation into her revealed that she had already done similar things in other towns. She had tried to pull similar scams, using political influence and social pressure to wrest properties from their owners, always trying to mask it as some kind of community welfare movement. But now, with everything she's done here, they finally had enough material to open a serious case against her. She was sued, and it wasn't just me. Other people from other cities who had also been harmed by her came forward and started telling similar stories. In the end, she got herself into such a legal fight that she lost her house to pay the legal costs. The irony? The same system she tried to use to steal my property ended up ripping hers away. And me? Well, I finally had peace. The fences were redone, the gate was reinstalled, and any neighbors who still had a crazy idea about turning my farm into a public park learned their lesson pretty quickly. Because, in the end, the only thing that really works against people like this is a good dose of reality. Don't forget to leave your likes and opinions in the comments below.